Welcome everybody. We had a wonderful day yesterday when we witnessed Bert defending his PhD thesis. Today we'll have a wonderful day discussing education culture in Africa for the whole day. My name is Maarten Maus. I'm here the professor of African linguistics, and I was one of the supervisors of Bert. And he gave me the honor to, be your servant chair today. But the opening will be done by Professor Prah, and you can see him here on the screen. Very, very excited that you're ready to do the first address and the opening of this symposium. Even more excited for Bert. You are his hero, and he's been talking about you a lot to me. Professor Prah, he was leading the CASAS, the Center for Advanced Studies of African Societies. And in that center, a lot of work has been done of what Bert deems so important, the development of African languages so that they can be used in education. Professor Prah has a link to Leiden and the Netherlands. He has studied here in Leiden and in Amsterdam, originally from Ghana, but important part of his academic active life was in South Africa and the University of Cape Town. So please go ahead, Professor Prah.
Goeiedag, goedemorgen, dames en heren, collega's. Helaas, mijn Nederlands is een beetje achterhaald gegaan vanwege niet genoeg gebruik. Dus ik zal mijn kleine contributie in Engels houden. Yes, I left the Netherlands so many years ago. 1974, and since then my encounters with the use of the Dutch language has been only sporadic, occasional. So unfortunately, much as I would have loved to do it in Dutch, it's impossible. Anyway, since the mid-1970s, some of us have argued that culture, more specifically language, is the missing link in the African development equation. Culture, in its large scientific usage, is the accountable basis for understanding identity formation and social development. The informed conclusion which was reached was that without the use of African languages, the languages of mass society, there is no chance for African development. While language is not the only significant factor in the development process, it is the matrix within which the process is socio-culturally negotiated. It was realized that the use of African languages for education and development would instill a sense of cultural confidence emerging out of the fact that production and reproduction of knowledge can be transacted in the languages which everybody knows. Culture and memory can be profitably recalled through the use of African languages. The argument has over the years won acolytes, but this has preeminently remained at the level of argument, with little attempt to translate these views into social policy and practice. Van Pinxteren has become part of this cohort of scholars. Most international organizations are agreed, together with African authorities, the language of instruction policies in education should respect and use African languages in the early years of education. These views go back to the colonial period. In the 1920s, an imperial mind like Lugard was not unmindful of the persuasiveness of the argument. In principle, all African governments agree with this view, but hardly any are able or willing to devote the requisite resources for its achievement. However, the argument we are making here goes beyond the use of African languages or mother tongue education for the first 2 years. The point we are making is this: like the policy all developmentally successful countries have evidently pursued, African languages should be used throughout all stages of the educational system. The argument goes further to suggest that African languages should be used in all areas and all dimensions of social life. This is not to suggest that English, French, Spanish, and Portuguese, the colonial languages of Africa, should not be taught at schools. Rather, they should be taught as second, third, or fourth languages in the educational systems. This allows the acquisition and learning of foreign languages at the late primary and secondary levels. This is the approach used in most European and Asian countries. In post-colonial Asia, intellectualized local languages have become the main instruments for the development of Asian societies. In Europe, despite the wide knowledge and usage of English, practically each European country uses its own language or languages for education and wider social intercourse. This piece of wisdom of language policy, which is common to most of the world, remains uncommon to Africa. Where people are convinced about the value of African languages in education and development, they remain overwhelmed by the assumption that there are too many different languages. There is no existing scientific literature of serious quality, that there is widespread illiteracy, that the economic costs of the movement into African languages is overwhelming, or that there is lack of political will at the decision-making levels of African societies. Such contrarian views are predicated on the fact that the immediate interests of the dominant social groups are obviously not served by African linguistic sovereignty. Of the perceived constraints standing in the way of the use of African languages as languages of instruction and education, the most ostensibly formidable, it is assumed, is the argument that Africa is the Tower of Babel, and therefore, even where there is a will and means to use African languages in education and social life, the requirements of a unitary state will not allow the use of a profusion of African languages within any existing state. Of course, this argument does not address the fact that even in those countries where 80 to 100% of the people speak one African language, the use of an African language in education is so openly or quietly resisted. Examples of these latter include Eswatini, that's former Swaziland, Botswana, Lesotho, and Somalia. In much of East Africa, that is Tanzania, Uganda, Kenya, Congo, DRC, and northern Mozambique, Kiswahili serves as lingua franca. In the Central African Republic, Sango is a lingua franca understood by most of the people. The rejection of these languages as languages of education and advancement suggests that the problem is not simply a question of the profusion of languages within existing African states. It is a question of the inertia, hesitation, or unwillingness of the authorities and elites to accede to the use of African languages. Indeed, an important part of the instrumental qualities for elite status, power, and influence is precisely the command of the erstwhile colonial languages. There is no reliable tally of African languages. Counts range from 1,000 to beyond 2,000. This confusion and assumed enormous numbers plays into the hands of those who then argue that because there is such a profusion of languages in Africa, in other words, since Africa is a Tower of Babel, it is not realistic to envisage the use of African languages. And so the ostensible cause becomes the consequence. The argument concludes that, therefore, the colonial languages should be used. The rejoinder we have made to this argument is that, in effect, the absence of sound scientific basis, the myth of the African Tower of Babel is a justification for not using African languages for education, science, and technological development. It conveniently aligns with imperial sentiments and justifies neocolonialism. The search for the solution to African underdevelopment and sociocultural backwardness through the use of colonial languages has also a destination which is in its own right disconcerting. If we are waiting for the day when all Africans will learn, read, and write in colonial languages, that day will take forever to arrive. And even when that day arrives, we will find that Africans have ceased to be Africans and become Europeans. At the beginning of the 21st century, it is remarkable that no clear consensus exists with respect to either the number of languages on the African continent or how these languages can be usefully classified. Each researcher on African language appears to put his or her own tally of numbers on them. What is not easily recognized by many observers is that most of what in the literature and classificatory schemes on African languages pass as separate languages in an overwhelming number of cases are in fact dialectal variants of core languages. In other words, most African languages can be regarded as mutually intelligible variants within large clusters, core languages. Indeed, almost all African languages are transborder languages, and most of them cross more than one state border. In this sense, the concept of dialect, as used in the European context, is at considerable variance to African cases and usage. Concepts of discerned and designed languages have doubtful relevance and questionable applicability to African realities. What during the past 25 years, the Center of Advanced Studies of African Society, CASA's research has revealed is that over 80 to 85% of Africans as first, second, and third language speakers speak no more than 15 to 17 core languages based on our criterion of relative mutual intelligibility and structural cognosy. Africa, for its size, is hardly a Tower of Babel. We are arguing that if the total population of sub-Saharan Africa is between 1 billion and 1.2 billion, as first, second, and third language speakers, the Fula, Pula, Peul, Tukle, Fulbe Fulani cluster alone would account for about 60 million. Hausa and its varieties bring up another 50 million in each instance. Oromo, Igbo, Bambara, Amharic, Kiswahili, Yoruba, and the Gbe group would produce at least another 50 million in each instance. The Nguni dialects, the Sutu-Tswana, the Akan, the Eastern and Western Interlocution Bantu, the Kitara languages, Luganda, Lusoga, Lugishu, and Luo, Gur, Lingala, Kikongo, Somali are between 40 and 50 million per set as first, second, or third language. Other languages of much smaller size, but which enjoy preponderance in some localities within existing states, include the Fang, Nyanja Chichewa, Ga, Wolof, and Ovambo Herero. In as far as African development is concerned, the upshot of these factors is that the harmonization of orthographies of African languages, which show high levels of mutual intelligibility and structural cognition, would greatly facilitate the economies of scale in the development of educational, media, and cultural materials, which could go a long way in strengthening the basis of society for the cultural and social development of Africa. Furthermore, it is the only way of culturally empowering the masses of African society. It is the one way we can remove the cultural cleavage between the elite and mass society. It provides the key to the methodology of eradicating the stigma of inferiority, which the colonial experience in African language illiteracy has invested in African languages. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Martin. And also special thanks to Professor Prah. Hearing Professor Prah speak, who is really one of the pioneers in this field and one of the great visionaries, in my view, in Africa on this topic alone justifies this little seminar. But there is a bit more to say about these issues. And for the first round, let's talk about current and emerging cultural differences and similarities in Africa. I will first talk a little bit about why culture is important, what I mean when I talk about culture, and about the contribution of cross-cultural psychology. I'll show you a little bit of what I found, and I'll talk about what that means for Africa and for the future. So there is some consensus that Africa hasn't been living up to the expectations that people had of it when independence came in the 1960s. And there are a number of explanations for that doing the rounds. There is the explanation that it has to do with the climatic conditions. There is the explanation that there's just something inherently wrong with Africa and Africans. There is the explanation that it's all due to ruthless plotting by imperialist exploiters. There is the explanation that says, just wait, Africa sooner or later will catch up with the rest of the world and will become just like the modern West. And there are those that say, Africa is never going to work because the continent is so hopelessly fragmented. What all those theories have in common, in my view, is that they leave precious little scope for African agency. I mean, what can you do about the climate? And that they also paint an image of Africa that to a certain extent is static and makes Africa dependent. So I look to a different explanation, and for that explanation, I turn to Jan Vansina, and he has held that in pre-colonial times, people in Africa were by and large able to cope with the changes coming their ways because they were able to do that in a commonly understood, culturally appropriate ways. So he says that there were a number of larger traditions, cultural traditions in Africa, within which people were able to handle and understand and discuss the changes that were inevitable even at those times. But of course, then civilization came, so to speak, many of those traditions were not particularly cherished by the missionaries and the colonizers. So these traditions were more or less destroyed. And according to Vansina, that was completed by around 1920. And since then, what he says, what we've seen is a disoriented, leaderless mass of the population that is divorced from an elite that is increasingly oriented towards the West. And this is his explanation for why Africa is not doing so well. But he also says there is hope because this situation is inherently unstable. It can't stay like that. And he predicted in 1992 that we would see the emergence of what he called neo-African traditions. And he thought that they would be based in large part in African languages. And he thought that this is a process that would take around 2 generations to complete. That's his prediction. Whether true or not, we'll never know. But of course, it could be that because he wrote this 30 years ago, that we're now about halfway there. And of course, this approach is echoed by what we've just heard from Professor Prah and others as well, that using African languages is a necessary precondition for African development. So that's a more philosophical approach of why culture is important. There's also a more practical side of things, because it's well known from the management literature and from other literatures as well, that if you take a model that works well in one country and simply transpose it to another country, that you're likely to run into difficulties because of underlying cultural differences. It's that way in education, it's in organizational development, international management, etc. So that's another reason why understanding cultural similarities and differences is important. It's more practical. Now, turning to Africa, as we've just heard, there are 2 contrasting what I call pre-scientific myths or tropes existing happily side by side doing the rounds of Africa. One sees Africa as one cultural area, as basically an amalgam of all people who are in certain ways more or less similar, the same. The Africa as a country trope. And there's the other one, the Tower of Babel, Africa as a hotbed of endless diversity. Both of these tropes, I think they're tropes, again, paint Africa in a static way, and neither of them, I think, does justice to what is actually going on the ground. So we need to talk about culture, but what do we mean by that? Because culture is a concept that has been abused by many authors throughout the decades, so we have to be a bit more precise here. I think it's not enough to talk about culture, as many people do, as something that has to do with the past, or with artifacts, with stuff, with wooden shoes, with the ways our ancestors lived. It's also not, let's say, there are some people who say culture is anachronistic in a way, because it's still around, but in the future we'll all enter the wonderful paradise of socialism and we'll all be equal and cultural differences will disappear. Yeah. And there are those that say culture is a construct and you see it when people are mobilized and set against one another, right? Culture as the mobilization of difference. I, on the other hand, have a different approach. I propose to see culture as a value system that serves as common point of reference to a people. Phrasing it this way doesn't mean that everybody has to believe everything that's supposedly part of their culture, but they know what is normal in a specific cultural area. Before delving into that a bit more, let me give you an example of what happens when you see culture as something from the past, as the way our ancestors lived. There is this very recent article, it's just out, by Cameroonian authors who have created a scale that allows them to show to what extent individuals in Cameroon adhere to a number of cultural practices and beliefs that they have listed, that they have come up with. And they say, okay, if you use that scale, you can see to which extent people are still adhering to traditional Cameroonian culture or have become westernized. Of course, if you do that, then you are blinded to cultural differences as differences in value orientation. And what is more, you sort of create a dichotomy between the traditional and the West that doesn't do justice to what is going on. Because isn't it possible that modern Cameroonians can be not Western, also not traditional, but neo-African, right? That's the kind of thing that we want to discover. In order to do that, we need to be careful, we need to be clear about our level of analysis. Here you see a picture of a tree. A tree is a perfectly valid object of study. But here you see a picture of a forest, and the forest is also a perfectly valid object of study. But the techniques that you use for analyzing the forest can be different from those that you use from analyzing the tree. So we are talking about, the society level here. And how does that work? Here is a completely fictional example. In a country, there's a certain distribution of punctuality. Some people are less punctual to the left of the scale. Most are fairly punctual, and some are very punctual, right? And here we have an individual, let's call her Beauty, who is, as you can see in her society, pretty punctual, right? Now, what happens if Beauty moves to another country where the distribution of punctuality over the population might be slightly different? Now, Beauty doesn't change, but the context changes, and therefore she will be seen in a different light in country B compared to country A. And she has the choice of either staying the same or of adapting to the new culture. The basic idea of cross-cultural psychology is that we can measure the difference between these averages, and that says something about the underlying cultural differences. And this is an approach that has been pioneered by the Dutch social psychologist Hofstede. So he compares values held by people. How does he find out? By asking people the same questions in different countries and by comparing the mean answers. He has developed an analytical approach based on what he calls cultural dimensions, which has been helpful, shown to be helpful in preparing people for cross-cultural contact. The approach, of course, like every approach in the social sciences, welcome to the social sciences, has its limitations. For example, it may not capture the full extent of cultural differences and similarities that exist in Africa. We're not sure about that. It hasn't been researched. There are others who have also tried their hand at cultural dimensions and who feel that Hofstede is wrong and that they are right, etc., etc. And there is criticism of the entire dimensions idea. So we should take it with a bit of salt, but we can still see whether this approach gives us new insights that aren't available in other ways. I'm not going to list all the Hofstede dimensions. The one that has been taken up most widely in the discourse on Africa is in the individualism versus collectivism dimension. But he originally defined 4, and then based on further research in other continents, he came up with 2 other dimensions. Okay. And what he's done is he has developed these scores on a 0 to 100 scale for these dimensions that are available for more than 60 countries worldwide. But there are only very few African countries. So what I've done is I've tried to extend the data set by making use of the Afrobarometer survey, which has been implemented in a large number of African countries. And what did I find? Here you see a picture that is maybe a bit difficult to interpret, but it shows a cultural map, so to speak, very reductionist, I'll admit, of the Sotho in South Africa and in Lesotho. Now, I think it's logical to assume that at some point in the past, the Sotho, no matter where they live, were part of one linguistic and cultural area. But what we see is that doesn't seem to be the case any longer. The Sotho who live in Lesotho now seem to be culturally exhibiting some different traits from those in South Africa. And in fact, the Sotho in South Africa are more like the Tswana and Swazi who also live in South Africa. So it seems that there is some sort of, it could be that there is some sort of Black South African cultural identity developing that is different from the cultural identity of the neighboring countries. If we move across the continent, the Akan live in Ghana and in Côte d'Ivoire. They speak the same language, but culturally, they also seem to have evolved in different ways. If we move across a few countries, in Benin and Togo, we have the Adja and the Fon who speak similar languages. They seem to have retained cultural similarities. If we then go to a country like Kenya, the ethno-linguistic groups in Kenya seem to be all over the place. Even though on one dimension, power distance, they seem to be agreeing, but on other dimensions, they seem to be culturally different. So it could be that there is not one commonly understood cultural identity developing in a country like Kenya. On the other hand, we have the Lango, Acholi, and Luo who live in Kenya and in Uganda, who also speak similar languages. They seem to be culturally still more similar, even though they live in different countries. I've done something else. I've taken the national scores from Africa that I was able to get this way and compared these to scores from other countries that are already known. And that gave me this wonderful thing that people who don't like graphs will dislike, but I like it. It's a box and whisker plot. The boxes are the second and third quartile, so the central part of the values, and the whiskers are the first and fourth quartile, and the dots are the outliers. And what you see here is that the averages for Africa on these four dimensions are indeed different from the averages of other continents. So, you know, taking a very big step back, it does seem as if there are certain African commonalities that make Africa different as a continent from other continents. Let's take, however, what you also see is the large spread for every continent. So even though the average that people may perceive may be different, there is also, we should not lose sight of the large amount of cultural diversity that also exists. Let's take this third one, individualism versus collectivism. Blue is Africa. It seems to be the most collectivist continent indeed, and Europe is the yellow one, seems to be the most individualist continent. And of all countries, the Netherlands here is the most individualist country in Europe. The most collectivist country in Europe is actually Serbia. And as you can see, it is more collectivist than the average African country, right? So there's this large overlap as well. So what have we seen? I have talked about the importance of culture for management, for education, for cross-cultural contact, but also as an explanation for the relative underperformance of Africa as a whole. I've also discussed how culture might be changing. Culture is not stuff or the way people lived in the past, but it's a common point of reference to a people. And this is not an essentialist definition because it doesn't assume that everybody who feels part of a culture necessarily individually also subscribes to everything that's part of that culture, right? So this works at the group level, not at the individual level. And I think that cross-cultural psychology, in spite of its drawbacks, like other approaches also have their drawbacks, can offer a vocabulary and a way of researching this more. And this is important because it moves us away from the tendency to problematize culture in African discussions in African settings. And it allows us to look at African cultural identities as dynamic and positive. It allows us to do more research into these evolving and dynamic large-scale cultural differences and similarities in Africa. And it enables us to think on policies that might go with the grain rather than going against the grain. I have shown that it's not automatic that people who speak the same language also share the same culture, like with the Aka or with the Suk. It's also not automatic that people who speak different languages are also culturally different, depending on, of course, a little bit on how you define the concept of language, as Prah has said. And those patterns where language and culture do not coincide might be rare, relatively rare in Europe, even though we have the case of Belgium, for example. But I think those patterns are much more common in Africa. In some countries, it seems that a new national cultural identity is emerging. In other countries, that doesn't seem to be the case, and there's no uniform pattern that applies across Africa. We have seen that Africa is not one, even though there are some commonalities at the very general level. It's also not endless in its diversity. And we're going to need to do a lot more research, I think. And of course, we'll need to talk about the role of African languages in all of this more. That is for round 2, but first, I'd like to hear from our panel. Thank you.
We'll start with Yinka. Isn't it?
Yeah.
Yinka is a senior researcher here at the Africa Study Center, and he's a demographer, but looking into issues like health, like migration, public administration, and decentralization. Works in, of course, in Nigeria, but also a lot in Ghana, other countries in Africa, and not only Africa. And he was also one of Bert's supervisors for the master thesis and for the PhD. So we're very curious to hear what Yinka has to say.
If I move up front for the...
Yeah, I think that's
better. Thank you very much, Bert. Congratulations once again. Really enjoyed working with you, especially like Martin said. I like dealing with figures. So whenever he brings out these graphs, those pictorial presentations, for me, then I quickly see a story. And part of the story that comes to life, which you try to show, is looking at that graph, for example, the outliers, the individualism, the coming together. It provides us with opportunities to see data in action. I mean, like Prof. Prah mentioned initially, we talk of African languages, some from as little as 1,000 to 2,000, nobody even knows the extent. But in situations like this, data concretizes some of these perceptions that we have. And then it helps us to build on how to even go henceforth, because we start from what we know, moving on to what we don't know. But what do we know regarding emerging cultural identities in Nigeria, for instance? Things have changed. Society continues to evolve. And in this evolution, for instance, when we look at Edo State is one of the 36 states in Nigeria. The emergence and the deepening of the use of Pidgin English, for instance, if let's stay at languages. Pidgin English is eroding even the use of whatever way we want to call it, whether we want to be so romantic about the use of local languages. Pidgin English is taking over. Is Pidgin English to go? Yes, we do not like the loss of local languages. Pidgin English is emerging. But again, if we move a bit to the west, Sierra Leone is bringing order to the use of Pidgin English by actually encouraging the use of Creole. Creole and Pidgin English are almost the same. But okay, well, if we're not using local languages, despite our heterogeneity in Sierra Leone, therefore let's develop, let's make use officially of Pidgin English. So students in Sierra Leone officially now study Creole, even though it's generally used. So there's an order being brought to that. Will Creole and the way it's been standardized give us an opportunity, therefore, to even recommend or adapt in other situations languages that could be generally used. Africa as a country, Tower of Babel, yeah, the Tower of Babel, we all know the biblical story, differential languages. But the end was not what was achieved because it led to a dispersal rather than coming together. So two things are happening here and they're quite a bit contradictory. If we use the word Tower of Babel, yes, differential languages, but we want Africa to converge, not to disperse. So there's a bit of contradiction going on here, even when we want to use such a comparison. Is Africa westernizing? Yes, it is. In terms of food, yes. I mean, there was this funny data Tom presented, and it was real life data. We said, yeah, food imports to Africa is on the rise. But then if you break down the food imports, you find Nigeria actually importing more ice cream, even though it's classified as food. So it's westernizing. The ice cream was not part of the cuisine earlier. So there are certain things that are going on that, for me, points out to the fact that, okay, we are talking of food self-sufficiency. We should be thinking of self-sufficiency in staples. But when the idea now goes back to, okay, no, we'd rather be importing stock fish from Norway, despite the 200 varieties of fish that is in Nigeria, we spend money on that. In Cameroon, we import fish from Morocco, despite the Atlantic Ocean, that the vast expanse of it beside Cameroon. Are we not satisfied with what we have? Can we not really produce and use from what we are, let be self-sufficient? Or is it because we are earning so much money now that, well, the next stage of growth is to import because we are not okay with what is there? So the westernization itself, in a large way, I look at it much more from a food security perspective. What are we doing? Where is it leading us? And I go back to this revaluation that you talked about of African languages. There are opportunities, just like Prof. Prah said. And many times I've sat with Martin, learned a lot regarding these opportunities that are there. That, okay, first argument, diversity, second argument, but there's a convergence. Certain groups who subscribe and understand certain languages more, but what I want to ask then is this: how do we then treat the Yoruba students in Accra, students of Yoruba origin in Accra, who are in a predominantly Ga-speaking or Twi-speaking or Fanti-speaking zone, doing the West African Examination Council's exam after secondary school? Would they have had the opportunity in their trajectory over the years, from primary to secondary, to actually do the courses in Yoruba, which mostly we find in Southwest Nigeria and most of Benin Republic. Would they have such opportunity? We need to start thinking of such, because the spread is there. Go to every coast, you find the Yorubas there. Many parts of Togo, you find the Yorubas there. Sierra Leone, 5 countries away from Nigeria. You jump over Liberia, which is American English speaking. You still find the Yoruba speaking among the Creole. So how do we standardize across such and recognize such subgroups that subscribe to the mother tongue, in quotes, Yoruba? So thank you for this. It opens up for me more discussions really on the way forward.
Thank you. But then we first go to Alice Kubo, who is here. Also a PhD candidate at the Africa Studies Center to examine the she industry in northern Ghana and implications for livelihood. Let's listen to your views on this issue.
Thank you. Congratulations, guys, and thank you for having me here. The topic of culture is a topic that I dealt with actually in 2002 at NHTV Breda at the Habio, Hofstede for Tourism and Verkeer. I was doing a subject on cross-cultural studies, and I came across this also Hofstede. So when you were talking about Hofstede, to me, it just took me back to Breda in 2002, that far long ago. Interesting culture, I would say, and to address the issues that you raised, I prepared a little bit. If the first question is, do you see signs of emerging new culture identity in your country or the African countries you have lived in? Indeed, television. It's really been just spreading images and stories that are just really transforming so many African countries right now. Back to my own country in Kenya, I'd like to even share something that was very personal. I was at home in 2019, and there came my niece in jeans that were completely tattered, really just folds. And I looked at her and I said, "What are you wearing? Really?" And she said, "Auntie, what's your problem?" And I said, "Surely it's the village. You come here from Mombasa to the village in that kind of outfit." I said, "Auntie, sorry, but your time was your time and this is my time. We had these things here." You know, so for me, I was like, okay, looking back, there was no way I would have set foot in my village in that kind of an outfit. Okay, but there is my niece so comfortable in that attire. And I'm like, really, it's really changed. And I feel like I come back to the Netherlands. The tattered jeans at that time were not so popular. So already in Kenya, so many of the young girls were wearing such clothing. So that's how far the culture, how fast the culture is really changing. And I agree with Dr. Nyinka about food. You look at Starbucks here in the Netherlands, you go to Kenya, you find Java. It's there. It's just really another Starbucks, but with a different name. So food, dressing, and I would say also products like lotion, what we use, it's just really just there. So it's become so westernized, and it's just really changing the culture so fast in Africa, so fast for people like me who are old, you go like, this is just too fast. You also go to Ghana, where I've been doing my research. And again, exactly what Dr. Nyinka said, and that is something to me from East Africa that was really surprising. Because in East Africa, particularly Kenya, we try to we have kind of an affinity to our products, like we produce our own milk in Kenya, and I am in Tamale, and everything is imported, even milk. And I go like, milk from the US, really? So everywhere. It's changing. It's really not static. It's so dynamic. And the question is, into how far does globalization play a role? You didn't mention it in your presentation, but I think it does play a huge role in transforming cultures in Africa. The next issue that I would like to address is, what is your position in contrasting Africa as a country? Africa as a country. Having lived in the Netherlands for more than 20 years, at the beginning, I felt really, really disturbed by the way Africa is presented as one country. So you listen to the news and the journalists are talking about one country, something that happened in Kenya, but it goes like it's a whole continent. That it happened in the whole continent. So you go like, this is a journalist who's talking about an incident that happened in one country, but it's being presented as Africa this, Africa that. So at that time, when I moved here in 2000 and December 2000, when I listened to that, I thought, surely that's not happening in Kenya. That's happening in another country. But it's being presented as the whole continent is suffering that. And I was so, I would say, green. I would just get frustrated by it, like having only one example, like it's not happening in my country, Kenya, and that's where I would be. But in my work for 9 years in Amsterdam as a program manager for Africa, I traveled a lot in Africa, and I really appreciate the diversity. Each country is so different. It's the same continent, but there's just so much difference in African countries. And I would like to say colonialism has had its real huge impact on the continent. And you go to Cote d'Ivoire and you see people eating snails. And I'm like, really? And that is really something that they love eating, and they learned it from the French, you see? And you go to Senegal and they love the baguette. It's really just like, it's just part of us. So colonialism has really also had its impact on culture. Missionaries as well. The school that I went to in Kenya was a missionary school. We learned how to do embroidery when my grandmother had not learned that. So these are things that have really transformed Africa. And Africa as one country does not exist. It's really diverse. And I think that is one thing that you could probably spread that message, particularly to our Dutch journalists. Really help out. Yeah, so
Not going to win that battle.
So, and the other issue is Africa westernizing, or is it moving towards a new cultural tradition? It is westernizing. It is. It's what people are eating in Italy, pasta, you get it in Kenya easily, the Italian supermarkets. So it is westernizing. Is the one thing that I would like to mention in Kenya, which really makes me proud, is the SGR train, the fast train in Nairobi. It's such a luxury. I mean, really, it's, you sit in it and you're like in Europe. Seriously, you are like in Europe. So
In China, I believe. You're like in China, I believe.
No, it is really a beautiful train. I mean, it's like the trains that are running here. So we are westernizing. We are westernizing. However, the westernization is not really to be found at all levels of society in terms of class. So the rich, of course, and the middle class in my country, Kenya, is a huge percentage nowadays, but the poor are really getting poor. So it's not really, westernization is not really taking, I would say, place as it took place here. Perhaps maybe we could thank the Marshall Plan from the US that saved this place, and that doesn't exist in Africa. So, yeah, that's a bit of a pity. The last one is, what about the language issue? Do you see possibilities for a revaluation of African languages? And if so, in what way? The African Union has been talking about, and I stand to be corrected here, but I remember many years ago when I was working as a program manager for Africa and very much engaged with what was happening at the African Union in Addis Ababa, I heard that they were really discussing introducing Kiswahili as a language for the whole of the African continent. And as I speak right now, I know there are 6 countries that are speaking Kiswahili, but Ethiopia was also going to introduce it in its curriculum, and that's why I said I stand to be corrected. But South Africa did introduce Kiswahili. Yeah, so probably that is a savior for Africa, Kiswahili. You don't think so? All right. Okay. So that's what I wanted to share with you. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much.
So I would say welcome back. Hope we're all rested, nourished with Western food, wherever we are. And this is the second round of the discussion. And the title of the second round was, now it's gone again. Show it, yes. Pressure to use African languages in higher education is bound to increase. It's one of the statements and the premises that Bert has defended and shown in his thesis. So he will first present that, and after Bert's presentations, we will have reactions from the couple here, Asep Amha and Tom Dietz. Bert, go ahead.
And we will have ample time for discussion.
Okay. I will, in order to have ample time for discussion, I will try to keep my presentation short. There's a lot that could be said about this, but I'll try to stick to some essentials. Why use African languages in the first place? What the perspective I use is not the individual, but the systems approach. What can we expect educational systems in Africa to deliver? I will talk about the language barrier that I feel may exist. And I will talk about this idea of discerned versus designed languages before coming to some conclusions. There's a long-standing scientific consensus that shows that holds that education in a language that is close to the mother tongue of the learners works best. And several reasons have been advanced for that in the literature. It works best. Educating people in their own tongues is a human right. And it's important for development because it builds on indigenous knowledge systems, as has been argued, for example, this morning, also by Professor Prah. But on the ground, nothing is happening. And the literature has given many reasons why this is not so. There is no movement going on towards expanding the use of African languages in higher education in any massive scale. I believe that there are two primary explanations. One is historical, and of course, if we talk history in Africa, we talk colonial history. The colonial powers have no interest in developing African languages. But I think there is another important explanation, one that you do not yet find in the literature, and that is that African higher education is still possible in the former colonial languages because there is so little of it. Let me illustrate that with some figures. Here you see a graph of the evolution of participation in tertiary education, all kinds of tertiary education, not just university education, in selected countries over the last 50 years, since 1970. The dark blue line is Denmark, which started at a fairly high level of around 20%. But participation in education in Denmark has grown tremendously over the past half century and is now in fact at around 80%. The orange line represents South Korea. It started at a level much below Denmark, but it actually overtook Denmark and is now also at a level of around 80%. But then the light blue line is in fact the best performing country in Africa on this statistics in sub-Saharan Africa, I should say, not in North Africa, and that's Botswana. And as you can see, participation in tertiary education in Botswana has also increased significantly over the past 50 years, but it's now at a level that is at around 25%, so little under a third of what it is in most countries in the global north. And my basic idea is that in the north, providing tertiary education for all students in a foreign language would be impossible because education systems cannot provide enough students with the required language skills. Yeah? Even the best education systems in the world will not be able to provide enough students with the required language skills. Providing tertiary education in what is essentially a foreign language needs time and effort of students and teachers. But language abilities are not equally distributed over a population, as everybody knows. So if you want to increase the number of people who are educated in a foreign language, you have to put in a disproportionate additional amount of effort because the average language ability of students will lower as you increase the number of people that you want to educate in a foreign language. So there's a question here that is relevant, uniquely relevant for Africa, but not for other continents. And that's maybe why it hasn't been asked. And that is the number of people an education system can educate at tertiary level higher than, equal to, or lower than the number of people an education system can teach the required language? So, what is the level that is needed? The literature commonly assumes that the minimum level that you need to profit from tertiary education in any language is this B2 level, the advanced intermediate level in the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages. And the European Commission has commissioned research into how well education systems in Europe perform in this regard. One of the best performing countries is Estonia. In Estonia, they speak, as you know, Estonian, which is a very different language from English, and yet Estonia manages to give around 41% of its secondary school students at the end of their secondary school this B2 level in English, right? So those students could take tertiary education in English. And it manages that, it achieves that because it uses the most efficient methods of teaching English. It uses English as a subject in secondary schools. It teaches it as a subject, and that's more efficient than using it as medium of instruction, I think. So for the time being, as a hypothesis, I take Estonia as a benchmark. I suggest that there is a language barrier that comes into play as soon as you want to aim at tertiary education at more than 40% of the population. And now you will understand the red line at 41% that is here in this graph. So in Africa, providing tertiary education for all students in a foreign language is still possible. But in a country like Botswana, enrollment could rise again, as it has risen in the past. And I think that in the next decade or so, in a country like Botswana and some other countries as well, that is likely to happen. And if that happens, they will be confronted with this language barrier. They will run into problems giving enough students the required foreign language skills. Now, and then the problem becomes, which languages are we going to use? And for that, I'm inspired by thinking of a long time ago, the German guy Kloss, who in his native German coined the terms of Abstand and Ausbau languages. And I have taken the freedom to translate them into English, these terms, or to suggest terms that are inspired by that in English. And I use discerned languages for speech forms that are so different from another that they are thought to be separate languages. That's a linguistic concept. Designed languages is a sociological concept, and it refers to those languages that have been shaped and standardized as vehicles of literary and scientific expression. Right? They've been molded in a way, designed. And this is, of course, akin to the concept of Sibayan of intellectualized languages. If we stay, and in Africa, what is important to realize is that, as some authors have pointed out, like Jite, is that some languages in Africa have not been allowed to develop in this intellectualizing way. Literacy tradition in some languages has been destroyed, forbidden, or ignored. We have somebody here at the Africa Study Center like Anna Chiara Raya, who's trying to retrieve some of that knowledge where it's still available. So African languages have, in fact, I think, been de-intellectualized. Going back to Klos's Germany, the Ethnologue is a database that tries to count all the languages of the earth, and it discerns 15 German-like languages spoken in Germany. None of them are extinct, they're all still spoken today. But speakers of all these 15 discerned languages use Standard High German as their common designed language for formal education, in parliament, in law, etc. Almost nobody speaks it at home. Everybody has to go to school to learn that Standard High German. And I believe such a thing could be possible in Africa as well. But of course, in Europe, the process of coming from discerned to a certain smaller set of designed languages has been a historical process that has more or less been finished. We now all have these standard designed languages. In Africa, that is not yet the case. So there's a possibility there for African agency. And I suggest 5 principles for rational designed language choices. Develop a limited number of designed languages for education in such a way that they are easy to learn for as many speakers of discerned languages as possible. Strive for inclusivity, so that all have to exert a relatively low but relatively equal effort to learn them. Make use of existing bilingualism as a resource, and build incentives for linguistic collaboration among related communities. So, the language situation, of course, in Africa is not static, it's dynamic. Increased participation in education will make a gradual transition to indigenous African languages a necessity. And that is also a practical possibility once you start to look for a limited number of designed languages. And some countries are nearing that threshold that I think exists, and it's important to start planning now. Let me end with this saying that has been used in the Netherlands, but in many other countries as well. It comes from Latin. Small things grow through unity. I did some research into where this came from. And actually, the Romans first coined this because they fought a war against the Numidians in the north of Africa 100 years before Christ. And this guy, King Jugurtha, beat the Numidians. Beat the Romans, sorry, this guy beat the Romans. But then the Romans pooled their resources and they came back and they in turn beat poor King Jugurtha. So that's what brought them this insight. But just like with discerned and designed languages, this is an insight that has been reinvented and reused in different ways by people all over the world. And I'd like to end with this saying that I found that is apparently Yoruba. It's harmonious and becoming to walk together in unity. So, thank you. We have the Edinburgh Circle on the promotion of African languages. If you're interested in these kinds of issues, consider joining. Thank you.
Thank you, Bert. And And then we will have two contributions on the same rough topic before we have the general discussion. So first I would like to ask Dr. Azeb Amha to give her insights. Azeb Amha is senior researcher here at the Africa Studies Center and has seen the process of designing discerned languages in her home country of Ethiopia and all the political dimensions of it. So I'm very curious to listen to her.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Martin, and congratulations again, Bert, with your thesis on the topic of language, diversity and employing African languages in education. I have a few remarks as a reaction to things I saw in the thesis and the things you raised. One is to start with the theory that you applied, that is developed by linguists, but which you considered could be used for developing African languages. That's looking into languages that are closer to each other. There is something to it, but it is this specific theory, the ASCL, kind of automated system which shows which languages are closer to each other and thereby indicating that which languages would be easier for students, for people at school or university to learn easily. And I think that thing doesn't work because first of all, its database is really limited, just 40 words, and then try to come up with a kind of classification of historical relation among languages. So that would not work. I think my view in looking for languages that can be easily learned in an African context, those are languages that are available on the ground. Languages that are closest to children who go to school. For example, when I grew up in southwestern part of Ethiopia, in a family in which two languages were equally prominent, Amharic and Wolaita. I grew up speaking these languages. I don't remember the time I was taught, so I acquired them equally and I am equally competent in them. But those are the home languages. Okay, Amharic is also a language of school, church, and so on. It has wider functions outside of the house. But I was exposed as a young person to a number of languages in the area. Just thinking of houses, street divides, my house against a row of houses or compounds in front of my house. And I tried to think, that was last year when I had to give interview to Professor Marsken for the STEM and Out Africa interview. And then I started to think, how was all my language socialization? And I looked back how I grew up, and there were many languages available for me. I had at home these two languages, but when I went out to play with my friends as a child, in their home, there were next to Amharic, always other languages. We had Oromo speakers, different varieties of Oromo. There were Gurage people, there were Tigrinya speaking families, and we went from one house to the other. We didn't, of course, learn all these languages fluently, but you hear commands, you know greetings, and so on. So those languages, suppose any of those languages came in an education system, I'll be able to easily learn those languages. So the distance we measure should not be technically like, oh, what kind of languages are there grammatically like this, so it is easier. English is less inflecting, so it is easier. It's not that, but you have to be exposed to the language, internalize together with the culture, how people talk, the manners together. And that used to be the case in Ethiopia. There are problems now, maybe I'll come back to that. So that is one. So basically, the language that's easiest is the one available to a child. And if you go forward now, what's the context now, is that a number of local languages are available in media, technology has changed. Many people have mobile telephones. And the radio, when I grew up, was one station. TV was just one station, but there are now many TV programs in different languages. So we have a program in Tigray now, Oromo, and not just a little hour shared, but a number of hours. Those programs are open. And people like to hear them. They like to relate to that. So that makes a difference. Secondly, books. When I was young, these were rare commodity, but these are widely available. So that kind of change in technology accessibility to those languages would make a difference. And I think we as scholars advising policy and so on, I think could focus on that, make those languages available. There is a lot of creativity among young in working on that, and makes that visible. That's one thing. And another thing, that's one of the points about the easiest language. The second thing is that there is this problem discussed ever and ever again, why education in Africa cannot employ local languages, the main thing. And I think it is the way education is introduced in Africa. It is monolingual. It doesn't take local knowledge, local system into account. So learning is extremely formal in contrast to this easy play-like relation with language. That is not there. What is taught what's taught in grammar. I remember people who finished high school in English coming to university, and they are okay with the grammar. They can may be able to write essays, but they didn't know the greeting forms. So the things that you need to really be flexible, be easily integrated into a language that is not there. And that is a problem. So in learning English, and it shouldn't again be a problem in learning any local language that's taken. So education should be able to teach the way languages are taught should be different. So in that sense, not too formal, not monolingual. Education should reflect what is living among society, and that's something lacking. And just to narrow down to Ethiopia, for example, developing local languages to a higher level is possible. For example, in Ethiopia, currently Ethiopia has about 80 something languages we call, and the language dialect issue is a problem in some cases. But conservative count puts languages of Ethiopia between 76 and 80. And of these languages, we currently have about 53 languages written and used in primary school. And the process for that was started in 1991. And it's a huge progress if you consider that. And it has empowered people. People started to think positively about their identity, about their language. There's a lot of interest. But there is a flip side to it. The process was a bit rushed up. Preparations and material are not as robust as they should be. So there is a bit of compromise in quality of education. So people complain, oh, the current day high school graduates are not as qualified as high school graduates when Amharic and English were the only languages. You come to some places and in the school system, about 3 languages are given and 3 scripts or 2 scripts. 2 scripts is minimal. So if you teach Amharic, Amharic is given as a subject everywhere, and there would be 1 local language. Let me take, for example, Wolaita. In Wolaita is the major language taught. Next to it, Amharic as a subject, English as a subject. So the script for Amharic is different from the script for Wolaita, and the script for Wolaita is different from that of English. So just the symbol C is cha in Wolaita, it can be ka or sa in English, and it is r in Amharic. So for a child, it is really challenging to learn this, but it's not impossible. People are learning, but we need to, improve. It is started. I hope it will not change. And in this development, also it is positive, the problem of quality is one issue. And there is a second problem. We have been communicating with Bert about this, and he also mentioned towards the end of his presentation about unity. There is a challenge in developing those languages. Politics interferes. So there are politically motivated people who try to use those language differences for their political gain. You know, they can claim to power by saying, oh, this is a different language. We developed this one and not that one, and it goes this way and not that way. And because of that, there is, it became difficult since 1991 to let the idea of combining local identity, being a Wolaita, being an Amhara, together with being an Ethiopian. So maybe you follow news currently, there is a problem in Ethiopia that is somehow related to that kind of identity contestation. And people have the feeling that this hard work of trying to develop minority languages, cultures, identities has undermined Ethiopian identity, and that would endanger the country. There's a breakout is possible, but actually we are the only country in Africa that has a statement in the constitution which says any linguistic cultural group can develop its language culture the way it wants. It can go as far as secession. Any moment a group wants to secede, the Ethiopian constitution allows it. So there is that risk, that fear that if you just let these things go, unity would be challenged. But I think we should find a way to balance these things. You know, yes, Ethiopian identity as a country historically is very important, but at the same time, Ethiopia should not be a country that can ignore the dignity of its constituent people. Every group, you know, deserves its own, you know, identity to do. Self-governance is important. Developing and maintaining one's culture is important. These lights have been seen in the past year with its problems. These have been developments, and I hope they will continue. Those are my reflections.
Thank you, Azeb, for a very detailed and deep reaction to practical and fundamental sides to the proposals that Bert made. And Tom Dietz, demographer, former director here of the Africa Studies Center, but here standing and a fan of Bert's work, but also somebody who knows a lot of different corners of Africa very well and by his own experience. And I'm very curious to hear his view on the matter.
Thanks. Yeah, I would like to share with you 4 points. One, very much based on the joint experience with the Africa Knows Conference, where language was a very important element, really teaching many people about the importance of it. For the Africa Knows Conference, you probably know, we did an inventory of the developments of higher education in Africa, and at some point it became very clear that there is, up till 2019, you don't know what's happening currently. We are fearing what's happening currently, but until 2019, there was a rapid expansion in numbers of universities and numbers of students everywhere. So the enrollment figures are really rising rapidly. What you also see is a rapid growth in most African countries of private universities, and among them, a particular group of private religious universities. You can say that in language terms, most of the languages in Africa that have more than 100,000 speakers do have at least one university in their area. I think that's fair to say, and maybe even a bit more. So those universities in those places, with all the, in all those different cultural groups, could use a local language. And very few do, if at all. So the challenge is indeed to understand that trajectory, but also understand what could happen in the next 10, 20 years in that respect. The challenge is then to understand the way this process will move forward. And Bert has a very interesting statement that he says, at a certain point, you use even 40% of the enrollment figure, there is no way you can maintain the foreign language use. And the reason you give is puzzling for me. I can understand your reasoning, because what you say is at a certain point, the teaching abilities and the learning abilities of people go beyond what is possible in a foreign language like English and French. Assuming a bit that all those who are currently using English and French in university setups are well educated at the level of at least understanding what's happening, and I have my doubts there, honestly. I think that your explanation should be widened a bit. I do not deny that there is some truth in it, but I think there are three elements that you should add. One is a recruitment effect. In the past, most students came from well-to-do families in Africa. So they were more cosmopolitan in a way. They were more used to use other languages, also more foreign languages. So you can understand that those students, in general, were better prepared. They also have gone to the better schools, etc. And then if you now see that the recruitment of peasant students, of lower middle class students is really growing, and it's almost growing everywhere, it also brings with it that those students do not have the same preparation. So they are not as good in English or French or Portuguese as the ones from elite families. So that brings an urge to use the more local languages. Then the second way of looking at this is an economic way, because the moment you decide to use local languages, it means that the economy has to respond to that. To start with, of course, the publications, the textbooks, all types of materials have to be changed in a local language. And for that, you need a strong economic sector in that sphere. And for that, you need a certain scale. Now, for Yoruba or for Kiswahili, for me, that's a non-argument, because of course the scale is already large enough for very many years. So it could have been the case for a longer period. And then the most important thing, and I'll come back to that in my next point, is the political effect. If the elites are oriented to English and French as their status symbol also in a way, and if there is a more democratic development in which emancipatory groups also demand access to power, then political leaders cannot afford to go on looking outside. They have to look inside. They have to accommodate that, say, more lower middle class element of political demand. And then, of course, you touch on the decolonization debate, and you can see that those emancipatory groups, also the minority groups, now demand in a much stronger voice to also get access. And then the political elite, if they want to survive as an elite, they probably have to accept this trend. So that goes beyond your explanation. It's a more political explanation. I think that will become important. The big question is then, if universities would decide to use a local language, would that be the local language in the environment of that university? That could be any local language, and very many of them. Or could there be some national language, or in Nigeria, subnational language? So also the non-Yoruba areas use Yoruba as the major language of instruction? Or is there even a kind of supranationalization? It was mentioned that the African Union now on its website uses Kiswahili. The funny thing is, if you click on the Kiswahili button, you get empty things. There's nothing happening. But at least they show that they think that Kiswahili is one of the leading African languages. So Kiswahili, for major part of East Africa, could play this role, up to Kinshasa even at the moment, as the language of instruction. That decision is very difficult to take, because who is going to take that decision? And in principle, many universities in Africa now have the autonomy to decide. So they could decide at least to start using local languages and then to decide which local language. There's no rule, no law to make that impossible officially in many of the countries. Now, my second point, I would like to break down this word use. You say use of a language in higher education. And then most often then probably everyone thinks about the language of instruction, the teacher using a certain language. If you look at the language used in any universities, then it's also looking at what do students read? What are the texts that they're reading and what languages do they read? What is the language of the textbooks, the major first year student books? What is the field work that students do? In what language do they communicate if they do field work among the peasants, where they need either a translator or need to speak the language themselves? But also in practice, what is the language of parliament? What is the language of the law? And in what language are the legal texts in a country? And then finally, what is the language that students use among themselves and that teachers use among themselves? The country that I know best is Kenya. I've been teaching in classes in Kenya using English. The moment you have a break, everyone would speak Kiswahili among themselves. And then in a certain very politically problematic period in the Kalenjin-dominated universities, where I was teaching most of the things I did, quite a number of the Nandi-speaking or Kayo-speaking students would simply refuse to speak Kiswahili and simply talk the local language among themselves. So creating separate spheres. And what was very interesting is that teachers would simply join one or the other group and then also show their color and show their orientation. So this idea that an African university, in this case a Kenyan university, is English speaking, it's very, very fluid, because at campus it's basically every language that's being spoken, also by the teachers. So there's a lot of blending going on, and this fluidity, this blending is probably one step away from the formalization of using a more local language. And then the interesting thing is, where do you expect the local language to be first? And I think what's happening in legal department is interesting. Also in the Netherlands, the legal departments were the ones really resisting the fact that they had to teach in English, because most of the texts that the students have to read is in Dutch, because the law is in Dutch, most of it. So also in other countries like in Kenya and Tanzania, the legal texts are now partly in Kiswahili. And so you have to accept that there is a tendency in society that universities have to follow. Yeah. All right, my third point, it's the fourth point now, that's the designed language. And I'm surprised that in your introduction, but also in the introductions that we heard, there is so little attention for the institutionalization that is needed for standardization. So the moment you accept that in the Yoruba area, a university will use Yoruba as a language of instruction, then you need to accept what type of Yoruba is that. So you need a kind of language board to decide what is the proper way of writing and of using words and of even using certain ways of expression in languages. And in the Netherlands, we do have the Nederlandse Taalunie and guardians of proper Dutch. And we know how fluid that is. That's always changing. So what's happening actually in Africa? In which countries, for which language areas do you have these standardized boards? And one of the questions to ASEP is, if you have these 53 languages now in schools, then one step before that is the standardization. So who does it? And it's a whole power play. What type of dialect is more prominent and who decides about what to do? I would say that the use of languages of a particular language in universities needs this standardization before. You can't just start in a local language without this standardization. But then it also depends on what's happening in the rest of society. And the rest of society is in law, in parliament, what languages are being used and what is acceptable language use. In religious sermons, also the online ones, very important what language is being used there. In the media, and then in universities. I think universities will not be the first ones doing this. It's first starting elsewhere, and then gradually it's also probably also becoming more normal for universities to do some experiments. And they won't do the experiments in all the subjects at the same time. They will start with things like law and public administration, local planning, town planning, and those type of subjects which are more easy, and of course in the language departments of these universities. And then only later you will see that it will become normal to use a particular language as a language of instruction everywhere in universities. But it will take time. That's it.
Wow. Felix is installing his PowerPoint, and then we will be ready for the third and last round of discussions on the topic of decolonizing education in Africa. After Felix, we will get the views from Tijana George, and after him, Michael Eze. But Felix is now nearly ready, so I can give over the floor to him.
Maybe you should also share screen. Oh. So that the people who are watching remotely can have the privilege of become used to this.
Okay. Thank you very much, Martin. And congratulations once again to Bert. Yeah, congrats. But at the same time, I have to offer apologies first that I couldn't be here in the morning, and I would have loved to listen to Professor Prah. Secondly, when Bert and I were discussing about this afternoon, he said he doesn't want it to be confrontational. Unfortunately, I have tried not to be confrontational for 1.5 hours earlier. Now I cannot help but raise questions about some assumptions, especially when these assumptions are like new wine being put in old skin. And you know, the outcome of that is bitter wine. So I am sorry about that, but I am going to try to be as civil as I can. So I'm asking the question, whose education? So the whole discussion that was going on now, we are talking about foreign languages. Have we thought about what education we are talking about? Is that education not foreign? Please think about that for me. Is that education not foreign? You see, this is the challenge I have when we are trying to talk about these issues, because we do not reflect enough on the consequences of what we are talking about. What I'm going to try to do, well, the other thing I should say, I happen to hold a chair in ethno-linguistic vitality and diversity in the world. I cannot support any practice that would kill this vitality and diversity. And let me just put my cards on the table. When people talk about standardization, I'm sorry, that is the biggest killer of languages and of vitality and diversity. I have a paper on this topic. The title of it is The Uselessness of the Useful. So you can look it up. It will tell you why I think, yeah, we all think it's very useful, but it's useless. And it is the source of our problems. So what I'm going to try to do today is basically, since we are in the spirit of Africa Knows and Africa 2020, one of the keynote speakers at that, her name has just escaped me, but anyway, she made this point about if we want to do anything about decolonization of education, we should first deconstruct education and reconstruct it. There is a lot of talk also about epistemic reconstitution, which is about paying attention to the various knowledge systems that are there and not assuming that. And this is the point that I have said about education being foreign. The educational system that we have inherited is an educational system. It's just one of those systems of education in the world. We cannot continue thinking in this day and age of decolonization, of diversity, to thinking just about one system of education. No, where are all the African systems of education? Where are they in all this talk about language in education? Where are the African modes of education? And I just have to point out, in fact, Netherlands has been very good before. In the 1970s, the ISS had partnership programs in various universities in Africa. I know for certain that they had a program in the University of Cape Coast, which was the educational university, where they were investigating traditional indigenous educational systems with the hope of building upon that for education in the various countries. Where is that research? Anyway, I am going to also, and this is where I really want to be apologetic to Bert, I am going to raise some reflections on particularly some of the claims that is out there in the media from Bert, and to suggest that we need to reflect a bit more on the consequences of those claims. Now, I have only 20 minutes, and I know I'm going to run out of time. But I do want people to take away some key messages, even if I'm not able to expand on them. The first one is that we should break away from the status quo. You see, we love the status quo. If we are really faithful to decolonization, then including education, including language policies, including everything else, we should break away from what we have now. Why? Because any system that we have there is based upon this Euro-American system, which, as this, he's from Zimbabwe, but he's a social linguist in Australia, the University of New England. As he puts it, these three interrelated forces, the colonial imperialism, Christian modernity, modern nation state ideologies, this is where the languages things come in. Then you have these technologies of orthography and orthodoxy. I like that orthodoxy that he puts there. And this is one of the things that I would love us to reflect upon. You see, in the previous session, there was a lot of writing. Please, please, and please. The problem we have is that, one, writing is an old technology. Old technology that is used and was used to actually downplay spoken language, to say spoken language is ephemeral. When you write it down, oh yeah, it's the technology of the intellect. No. Spoken language, now with our new technologies, spoken language is as permanent as you can get writing. In fact, spoken language is even better because when you get writing, you go editing it. But if I'm being recorded now, unless I go editing it, you've got everything I'm saying, including my gestures, which are so important, which you do not get in writing. So let's reflect on the advantages of the modern technologies that we have. Does that need any standardization of people? You see the point that people make, oh yeah, so Professor Prah was talking about people speaking these various languages and they can communicate and understand each other. If you move it, and he thinks that if you move it into the writing system too, it's possible. I'm not sure. I think in spoken language, because you are speaking, because you are interacting, even if your languages are distant, you can get to a common ground. You can negotiate meaning in things. Anyway, so the point really is about the technology, that we shouldn't be focusing too much on that, orthography and all that. The second point, and this is just a simple point from decoloniality thinking. Decoloniality thinking embraces diversity and inclusiveness. We cannot be talking about decolonizing education if the systems we are proposing are still going to be separating things. So one of the consequences, I'll tell you, of, say, the designed language system is to create dominant versus dominated languages. And that is not inclusiveness. Then there's also the other thing, in terms of education, we tend to just think that there is only one knowledge system, which is out there. And that one knowledge system, of course, you know what that is the Western. And we tend to forget that actually it is cultural, that it is not universal. And that is an important point for me. Please, let's get our minds to this idea that what we are used to is not universal. So it doesn't have to work in Africa. And I'm going to tell you why it doesn't work in Africa. Anyway, and we should include all knowledge systems in the body of the knowledge that we build in our human investigations of our nature, so to say. Importantly, we should break away from these dichotomies that we create, not only between scientific and folk, but also between this formal, informal, between vernacular and standard, non-standard. That is not inclusive. Let me put it that way. And we have to, yes, this is one thing which is also a problem with respect to the educational system. The way we transmit knowledge, the way people learn is different. I don't know if I'll have time to get to it, but fundamentally, African cultures have been oral cultures. So orality was the premium. We introduced a schooling system which puts a high premium on literary skills. However, we didn't introduce the literate culture that goes with the schooling system. And this point is not just relevant for Africa, it's even relevant in the Netherlands. That the people who do not make it in the schooling system are people who do not have the literate culture. And long ago, in 1975, Bryce Heath in America studied 2 communities. And the title of that paper was What No Bedtime Story Means. Think about that. And actually, the interesting thing about that study is that she followed them for 30 years. So afterwards, 30 years after, she published a book showing how this no bedtime story affects their life, even in adulthood, so to say. What does that mean? The problem we have, and that's why I say it's foreign to start with, is that the literate culture that goes with, we take it for granted that people know how to open a book and find information. This is literacy. And why is that easy for people in this culture? Because of the bedtime stories. Even children, before they come out of the womb, are already constructing stories on pictures in their room. Think about that. And why will they not perform well when it comes to using that literacy skill? This is the issue. And then we need, and I can't stress it much more, the plurality of things. We need to get away from this monolithic thinking about everything, thinking that what is the status quo is universal, thinking that what is there is what should work. No. The more we, as I said at the beginning, the more we try to put new wine into old skins, the bitter wine comes out, and we are not going to succeed in the change that we need. Anyway, I have said about all these things, and just last week I read this beautiful interview of someone I admire, Judy Messman, where it was in the context of she getting the Stedin Prize, the prestigious prize in the Netherlands, and the interviewer was asking her how she reacts to all the heat against her in terms of her interest in diversity and so on. And I mean, this is what she said. And one of the things she said afterwards is, yeah, well, when it's coming in, I try to avoid it, but afterwards I sit down and read it, and then I write a response to them in a reflective, intellectual way. So if you don't like my talk of diversity, attack me, no problem. I want to talk now about one of the things that people have been suggesting for decolonizing the knowledge systems, let me put it that way. And I want to throw a question in this room. How many senses are there? Please answer me. How many senses?
Since your previous talk, 6.
No,
7.
I don't want your answer. Okay, what are they? I can say. So,
Plus balance.
well, Okay, you see, she's preempting me because she has heard me talk about that. But the point I want to make is actually go to any school, even in the Netherlands. What do they teach the children? They teach them 5 senses. 5 senses. That's what is taught. But this 5 sense model is a model of Western culture. And because of the Western culture, even smell is thought of as a low sense, you know. And then because of the Western culture, seeing is on top. The eyes are on top. There are other cultures where the eyes are not on top. It is the ears that are on top. And then there are smell cultures, even in Africa. In fact, Professor Bert van Pinxteren, he wrote a classic paper on smell in Kapsiki, where it's linked to the blacksmiths and their role and everything. And if you move from Kapsiki in the Cameroon, you move up to Nigeria, you go across into Chad, along that area into Ethiopia, you get, and down even into Kenya, because the Luo, for example, they have a distinct word class for smell words. So these words are not nouns, they are not verbs, they are not idiophones, they are just smell words. So they have a distinct class. Isn't that exciting? But then you tell me that this is a low sense, just because that is what happens in the Western cultures. Okay, what I'm going to say now is the following. And this I've taken from Catherine Gertz, who is an anthropologist, who worked among the Anglo Ewe in southern Ghana. And she has this book called Culture and the Senses, but she also actually has a paper where she talks about of rocks, walks, and what is it, the other one? I can't remember. Anyway, the point is that she made this point that she's American, so she's referring here to the American schools, where even till today, they are taught these 5 senses, and even till the beginning of the 20th century. But the critical point, and this is what I mean by epistemic reconstitution, we have all this knowledge. We say we gather indigenous knowledge systems. Let us not museumize them. Let them have an impact in the transmission of knowledge that is going on. And that's what I mean by let's be inclusive of building that body of knowledge. And the interesting thing about balance is that, and this is where people will say scientifically, we have even a correlate of balance, which has been identified. Yet, this has not permeated into the school system. Isn't that sad? Because we want to keep to the status quo. And even this balance has an evolutionary advantage. It's an affordance. You know, when Homo erectus got up and became bipedal, you needed balance. And you know this from the children when they are learning to walk. You crawl on your fours, and when you become bipedal, you have to balance, otherwise not. And of course, I don't have to convince the Dutch in the room about how they train their children to become cyclists, and why when yeah, you see. And since he is doing something, let me just get there. So this is the thing. Look at this woman. Look at what she's doing. She's carrying this thing without touching it. She's balancing it on the head. And this we have seen long time on our continent. And carrying a baby too. And carrying a baby too, you see. So the point I'm trying to make is that these things, and this is one of the reasons I am very, very not happy when people try to make this distinction between informal and formal, between everyday things and scientific knowledge. This is the point, because this is an everyday practice. And it is just that we as scientists, as researchers, do not recognize it to impact our knowledge systems. This is the critical issue for me. This is just talking about how people do the head loading. How much time do I have? I can go on. Okay, thank you. I am going to play something here. And so this is an important point about the media that we have these days. I was sent this on WhatsApp, and I love it so much. So this sums up what we should be doing if we are talking about decolonizing education. We have to change notre système éducatif, s'il vous plaît. And I'm going to play this, and I haven't provided a translation. I'll try to translate as she goes on. But partly, anybody who speaks some French should listen out for the French words. And here we go. I've come. Today I've come to talk about something that troubles me. We are in school, sukulu. So college, kakaba lycée, from college to lycée. We have that professor, okay? So from grade 4, well, I don't know how the French system goes in Togo. So. And then they develop, teach you all sorts of formulas, and one of them is saponification. And then I finished school, and now I wanted to become an entrepreneur, and I wanted to become an artisan. And the people who haven't been to school know the formula better than I do. And it's a system of education. So the formula that we give to soap. So that's the formula, which she didn't understand at that time. So you know, H2O, say H2O. Yeah. And then it gives something till something we call savon, soap. So now he's saying, Monsieur, if you are told me take 6 liters of any oil, take 1 liter of water, mix it, leave it for the next day, and then try to mix them again a lot, and then a lot. Leave it to cool and let it just be exposed. After 4 days or 1 week or even 2 months, then you have made a soap. And if you had taught me that from that grade 4 till I go to university and out, if I had known that, I would have become a rich person because I would make it. But then she makes an attack at it. He says, yes, teacher, you are teaching me this formula, but you go around again to buy your soap. You don't know how to get your own soap, but you teach me this formula. So what do you call that? When you have that formula? So the formula that you used to teach me, NRORC, that's what I've returned to you today. I think I'm not going to say anything more, but I want you to also pay attention to the fact that she was speaking and there was switching going on. Okay. Oh, yeah. Yes. I was talking about these modes of knowledge transmission before. You see, there is something that our cultures determine, or if you like, there are certain ethno-theories of how we want novices in our cultures to be socialized. And these socialization modes relate to how relations work in our cultures. Unfortunately, in the Western culture, and I'm not the one saying this, this is what Hofstede also found out anyway, that there is an equality model, okay? Very independent individual conception of competence. There is cognitive maturation. So this is, and then they try to transport this to us. So you are supposed to be at a certain age, and then you can go to this class and to that class and so on. And then there is dialogue. So if you think about how parents in this society relate to their young ones in terms of interaction, then there is choice, mainly horizontal. And this is an important one. And this has cost the lives of many people. Eye contact. I'm sure many people here will have some stories about that. Child-directed language. Critically, object play. You know, this object play is part of those literate cultural practices. And this feeds into educational practice. For many places, there is an apprentice model where learning is by observation. And my point is that there is an interdependent social conception of competence. There is experts teaching novices. There is training. And it's mainly vertical physical proximity, responsiveness to negative signals. In fact, some of this work is what Judy Messman has been exploring for the different cultures that have found themselves into this country. But the other point I have to make is I am not suggesting that there should just be a monosystem. So my question and my thought and my plea is we have to think about the methods of knowledge transmission in our educational systems, which combines these two things, rather than just focusing on that equality model. Now, there was a talk before about, oh, training teachers and so on is all difficult. One of the things I keep saying is it's because we are not relying on the resources that we have. And that comes with this formal and informal distinction. When I was growing up in my primary school, the way I learned about World War II was when the teachers invited this ex-military man who had been to Burma to come to the school to talk to us about his experiences. That is how I learned about World War II. I think that we can, and actually I should also add that in the current climate of language revitalization, there are many places where this kind of apprentice model is practiced a lot for the transmission of language. So we can benefit from reflecting on what these things mean for our current situation. Let me now say a few words in closing about some of the things that Bert has said. In the sense that, I mean, the point I want to make is, yes, this is true. And when you talk about English B2 level, and you see, I cannot help but ask the question, who designed that framework? It's an European framework. You want me to use that framework in Africa? No. Okay. But the point is that when we are talking about language and so on, the issue is we tend to talk about French, English, Portuguese, and Spanish. And this afternoon, this was happening all over, saying they are foreign languages. I'm sorry, French, English, Portuguese, Spanish in Africa is no longer foreign to Africa. And I will say this, and I know lots of people will disagree with me, but I challenge them. I challenge those who disagree with me to use an African English expression to a British speaking person, whether they will understand them. And I say, no, they don't understand. There are lots of things. And there are the commonplace expressions that people talk about, the kinship terms that are extended and so on and so on. But there are other things. And the funny and the most interesting aspect of this is well, Bert said it's a dynamic thing, but we tend to lose sight of the dynamics of language contact. So in Uganda, I understand the word for that staple food that people call ugali all over in East Africa is posse. Somebody knows it better for me. And yeah, no, that's fine. And that's part of the writing thing, because I always saw it in writing and I assumed something, you see. The point is, where does that word come from? That word comes from the colonial times, where it is coming from the English word portion. Look how they attribute an English word to a culturally salient food item. But what is the context of it? It's when you have a portion for the domestic workers, etc., etc. This is how it comes about. So when we talk about language as if it's an island, I told this story yesterday. There is a word for onion in an old Dutch word for onion, which many Dutch people do not know, but that is the word for onion in Fanti. Exactly. So this is the dynamics of language. And it is also true that many Fanti people will not know that that comes from Dutch, okay? But that's part of the issue. So let's stop thinking that these languages are foreign. Now, I'm also going to play a first part of this, which I also got on WhatsApp. And this is...
I'm very passionate about this because I think that it's something that Nigerians need to begin to take a second look at. The idea is that a young friend of mine came to my house after about 7 years of not seeing me. He had come to meet with his brother, who was in from the UK and was staying with me. And was quite brilliant when he was in secondary school. He was a very young child. So I expected him back. Okay, by now he would be in university or graduated or something. So he said he was a cab driver. He came to raise money from his brother to get a new engine for his cab. I said, you're a cab driver, what happened? You were smart, you were intelligent, you had something going way back. You were doing well in school. He said, well, we went to study law, and he never could pass English. He could pass about 3 or 4 other subjects, including economics, government, and some other, but he couldn't pass English. So I started thinking to myself, this guy could not pass English language. What language did he use to pass the other 4 subjects? First of all, because he passed economics, he passed government, and some other subject like that. If he used English language to pass those subjects, and he could not use English language to pass English language, there's something that's fundamentally wrong. Then I said to myself, okay,
something is fundamentally wrong. This is part of the standardization prescription problem. So he goes into an exam and they want him, actually, I think he continued to say that he can communicate very effectively in English, speaking it, but of course, that rigid prescriptive system fails him. And then that's why someone who wants to do law becomes a cab driver. The challenge is, is it really because of the language, or is it because of the systems that we prescribe with these languages? I'll stop that one there.
I'm very passionate.
Now, and this, I've already mentioned this to Bert, so he knows this one. I think this is against social justice. This is against linguistic justice to claim that, oh, the Limburgish people and the Saarlands people, they get good education in Dutch. Right? Is that a good one? Yes. They get good education in Dutch. No, I don't think they get good education in Dutch. I think they would be better off if they got education in both Limburgish and Dutch. And the point is, they will be better off if it is a multilingual education. Yeah, and then there is this idea, ease of learning, and then you cite Bahasa Indonesia as an example, and then you say, it has a simpler grammar than Malay. On what measure is that? You see, this is my problem. I don't have any problem if it has a simpler grammar, but tell me, what is your measure of simplicity? Because, and I should just add, there is a big debate in linguistics about this kind of simplicity versus complexity of language. And I mean, the little I know about Bahasa Indonesia is that it has a complex grammar. In fact, because it has certain unexpressed, certain covert categories, it is very difficult to master in a way. So what is the measure of simplicity? This is my problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Felix. There's a lot there, very rich. And we will first listen to a reaction from Tijana George from Afla Town. To me, that's a town in Ghana, but okay. It's an organization that is dealing with education and also in Africa. And I'm looking forward to a reaction from somebody who is much more oriented into the practice of how things work. So please go ahead.
Thank you. Akpelo. Thank you. Yes, so yeah, my name is Tijan and I work for Aflatun International. And yeah, what we do is that we actually implement social and financial education programs around the world. Myself, personally, I work in Anglophone Africa, and we've actually worked already with Felix a few times. He kind of reviewed some of the contextualization work that we do. And yeah, so what I'll kind of talk about is a little bit about what we do, how we do it, and some reflections on how, you know, language and colonialization kind of play in together, and then also some reflections from some of the partners that we work with, and some of the partners that actually Felix has had the chance to work with as well. So yeah, we work with about 300 partners or so in about 100 different countries. So I mean, you can imagine that there's absolutely a need for contextualization, and so that's something that we focus on. Yes.
Move a little bit close to the microphone.
Oh. Sure. So yes, as I was saying, we work in a lot of different countries across all continents. So of course, there's definitely a need to contextualize the work that we do. So that's really one of the, I would say, key things that we've kind of realized is important when implementing these different social financial education programs. But we can't do it ourselves here. I'm one person from one place and in one culture, and we work with partners in so many different places. So we've kind of put the onus into the hands of our partners, who contextualized using a lot of different methods, using research, workshops with not only education specialists, but people in the communities we're working in, as well as gender specialists. And one thing that always comes up is, of course, the importance of language. Why is that? Well, we really honed in on the fact that language is, aside from being, how we communicate, it's knowledge, it's your identity. It's also the manner in which you begin to learn the codes and culture of the society that you live in. So if you're being taught something in a language that you don't fully grasp, it's going to be very, very difficult for you to grasp the concepts that you're being taught. So this is very, very important insofar as trying to communicate the different concepts and pillars of the education that we're trying to implement. Of course, we say social financial education. That can have very, very different implications depending on where you are. More generally speaking, we have pillars that look at personal understanding, self-exploration, and things that are a bit more general that can be adapted to different cultures and societies. But yeah, essentially what I'm trying to come back to is that language is essentially part of your identity. And that's why it's so, so crucial to ensure that the language of instruction can also match the identity of the person being taught, because we're also very focused on child-centered learning. So it's kind of a little bit about how we go about teaching and how we focus on language. And to relate this back to decolonization, I'm going to steal a bit of an idea from the book Aventure Ambiguë, so Ambiguous Adventures from Sheikh Hamidou Khan, where he kind of explains the goal of colonization. He kind of says when the Europeans showed up on the shores of Africa, their goal was to destroy and build. And what is it that they were destroying? Well, they were destroying the existing culture, and they were building a new culture that fit in their own identities and fit in what they were trying to achieve. And so when we look at that, we also need to understand that language is a tool to achieve colonialism as well. And I think these kind of tools can be seen throughout the society that's been colonized. And actually, I was watching a video not so long ago from the Professor Luazi Lushaba, from South Africa, who speaks extensively on decolonization, who says that you can even see colonial structures. If you look in South Africa, you can even see structures of apartheid in architecture, buildings that were built to keep segregation and to ensure that there was no crossover between Black and white people. And of course, you can say that apartheid ended 26 years ago, but those architectural structures are still there. So they still do not promote the interaction between these people. And this just goes to show that really, colonialism is really embedded into everything, every part of society. And this is, of course, including language. And that will really show you the importance of the language in the whole education system. Also like to, I'd like to look at, one of my favorite artists is called Akala, and he talks a lot about pre-colonial education. And when he talks about pre-colonial education, what he's talking about is the stories that, because him, similar to me, who's brought up in Europe, although he came originally from Jamaica. But yeah, when he talks about pre-colonial education, he talks about the stories that we were never told, having grown up in places where those stories were not important. And so in that sense, decolonization is also the affirmation of ourselves and valuing these cultures that we were never taught about, but that we are inherently part of. So this is a quote that I quite liked that just speaks about efforts to decolonize education. So the efforts to decolonize education in sub-Saharan Africa need to include reteaching Africans that their mother tongue languages, philosophies, cultures, and traditions are not pre-logical, pre-critical, and pre-literate, or in any way inferior to those of European or Asian civilizations. Yeah, this is just in line with what I've been saying. For me, the reason that we work to contextualize and to ensure that not only the language is used, but also the examples, the context used in our work match the learner and not the pre-existing structures of colonial education. Yeah, so I mean, when we talk about rebuilding education systems, we're not just talking, well, not just talking about language, of course, but we're talking about a process that includes the learner, the teachers, and also non-teaching staff that may be part of the school system. It's very much a collective effort, I think. And yeah, I also just wanted to share a bit more about our network and some of the stories and the examples, the practical examples that they've given in terms of how they've experienced the decolonization of education or colonial education systems. We have a partner in Ghana who spoke to us extensively about, you know, the need to, well, the overuse, let's say, of foreign examples for local contexts, and how that limits the imagination of the students that we were working with. She was talking to us about, you know, how there was educational content that was actually geared towards sexual health, sexual and reproductive health. And you're talking to students who are being taught about maybe certain preventive measures that they're not aware of or don't understand fully. Of course, there is a standard of what you would like to see in terms of preventive measures, but if the people you're teaching these to don't actually understand them, it actually limits them in their complete understanding of this and in how they will then practice whatever it is that prevents them from, whether it's to, you know, being pregnant underage or getting a sexually transmitted illness. You know, we're not actually communicating with them by just teaching them something that we think is relevant to their lives, without actually trying to understand what it is that they understand. Further to that, we had a partner in Uganda talking about the Ugandan curriculum, where they were teaching about, you know, some of the great geographical wonders, we could say, or landmarks in Africa, speaking about the Nile River and about the Victoria Falls as well. And in the Ugandan curriculum, they were still referring to these as European discoveries, which I think is not only inaccurate, but it's also completely irrelevant. You know, it kind of overlooks the whole existence of the communities and civilizations that were actually built around these geographical landmarks, which, you know, are also full of riches that were being used before then and have a huge economic implication. So there is obviously history that predated the discovery, so to speak, of these landmarks by Europe, and yet it's still in a Ugandan curriculum. More so focusing on financial education, because that's also part of what we do. We have a partner in Ivory Coast who spoke to us extensively about a campaign that he did with Visa, where they were going around campaigning for financial education and financial inclusion. And they finished their campaign tour in Abidjan, where they had a really big kind of conference, let's say, with a lot of young people who were put in the front rows, etc. And at the end of the conference, you know, the young people were clapping and were really excited about what they'd all been taught. And he decided to take some of them and have a separate class with them and talk to them about what they learned, and very quickly realized that, as he said it, the ones who were clapping the loudest understood the least. To counteract that, he went outside and he just spoke to a few Zems, as we call them. Zems, it's basically motorcycle taxi drivers I think very prevalent in West Africa. I wouldn't speak for East Africa, I don't know so much, but yeah, call them Zems. And he just gathered a few of them and spoke about the exact same concepts that he'd just been speaking about, without giving a full 90-minute presentation on it. And they understood, they grasped those notions. And that's because they were being spoken to in a language that they understood, in a context that they understood. So I think these are, you know, kind of very kind of almost jarring examples of how disconnected our efforts can be if we're not making the educational content that we develop learner-centered. And when we look at making our content learner-centered, we have to understand the context of colonialization in the existing educational systems. So I think, yeah, that's kind of generally what I wanted to say. And I think that, you know, what we can do, there are obviously a lot of efforts right now to try to decolonize education. There's, you know, examples of in Ghana where the your first 3 years of education has to be taught to you in your mother tongue, for example. In South Africa, where they've nationalized 11 languages. And there's a lot of examples of ministries of education taking action. And I think we really need to continue to drive this forward, and really need to continue to look at how we can not only decolonize education, but more so than that, like look into what that means and look into how we can, you know, put the learners and the people in these countries at the center of our new education strategies. And that's, you know, something that I think is extremely, extremely important. Yeah, that's about it from me. Thank you for listening. Thank you for having me.
Nice addition and confirmation Felix's plea at the practical level. Yeah. And we have an extra contribution by Michael Eze from Leiden University Philosophy Department, whom I give the floor to react to previous speakers.
Is it possible? Or you want to use it again? Okay, just okay. That's fine. Well, I don't control it. So. Okay, that's fine. Yeah.
He controls it.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, is it possible to switch this off, the light?
I'm afraid not, that the people online.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, that's good.
But you can stand a little bit on the side.
Yeah, that's fine. It's blinding. It's fine.
Stand wherever you like.
You can, if you stand here, you have less. Yeah.
Okay, let me stand closer.
Stand with me. But you might
So thank you. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. I love contact of knowing. Well, it's happened to me when I came to Europe for the first time. In my culture, you don't look people straight in the eyes. It's rude, actually. In Zimbabwe, actually, sometimes when your elder is talking, I see people, you actually be clapping, agreeing in agreement, whatever. And these are different ways of expression on learning. In Yoruba culture, I mean, you prostrate before your parents and stuff like that. So looking people straight in the eyes is actually very rude. So my boss at the King Institute at Stanford called me, Michael, you know, here you have to look people straight in the eyes because it shows you're honest, you're being truthful, you're convincing. Even now, and I still struggle with that. And I said, well, if you don't believe me because I don't look in the eye, then it's problematic. And so that's just now the cultural formation of epistemic nuances within the location of culture. And the culture shapes the way we believe, where we do things and stuff like that. And I find this lecture you gave today is very, very fascinating, something very, very close to my heart. I mean, it's only in the linguistic department that you can give this kind of lecture and rupture the orthodoxy and get away with it. I think this is probably the only place. And precisely because of the role of language, because as Frantz Fanon said, he said, language is a window of culture. So if you want to have accessibility to people, you go through language, and this is what we are doing. And you know, language is just about politics. We talk about language, standardization of language. It's also about power, political power. When you hear somebody speaks with a certain accent, what comes to your mind? It becomes performative. And then it comes a displacement of subjective displacement. So when I hear certain accent, I say, what does that tell me? Oh, he's probably not well educated. No, I gave a lecture somewhere recently, and I have my exotic Nigerian accent. And of course, people will say, well, does he really know what you're talking about? The other professor told him, this guy has 2 PhDs, one from Cambridge. Oh, really? From Cambridge? I said, 2 doctorates. Yeah, one from Cambridge. Oh, maybe he has something to say. But my accent already becomes a kind of a subversion of my own subjective placement within the moment because of language. And then, of course, if I went to one of my students go to study in Cambridge, I wrote a very nice letter. She got a cum laude. And they said, you have to do TOEFL. So I said, oh, language tax. So I wrote to the admission officer, well, actually, she's from Ghana. Let me be honest with you. You were studying at Oxford, but her English is probably 10 times better than yours. And we have front and back until they accepted her to go and study without doing what I call language tax.
So language becomes very, very important. But language is considered a window. It's political. It's performative. So when somebody is performative, so it's not going to go away anytime soon. So we wish that, but you want to rupture it because it's also it's performative, it's cultural, it's power. So that part of the aspect of that, and then bring it to education. I like the fact, I like you critiquing inherited education. Let's call it, I wanted to write some that one, I wanted to push it away. Let's call it homogeneous ontology. There's the critique against homogeneous ontology, of the homogeneous ontology. It is a derivative of the fact that this is just one system. Yeah, the homogeneous ontology. So this is what, let's call it, we're making it up now. From what I don't learn from, it's not writing, let's use this one. So I'm going to use these two terms we can write from here. It just came to my mind. Let's call it, for the sake of argument, one is homogeneous, critiquing ontology, okay? And then one is, for the sake of, let's call it epistemic mobility, okay? Epistemic mobility. So we're just using this mobility. Critiquing this for the sake of epistemic mobility. And this is where the revolution happens. In Closer Zulu, we say, I wrote a book on Ubuntu philosophy as an article model for the education. Because in Kinyarwanda, I would say, knowledge is the only thing that grows when it is shared. So if you want to grow, it has to be shared. So for the purposes of epistemic mobility, the language is a bit, not just decolonization here becomes democratization, which has open access for what we may call competitive collaboration in order to have any kind of possible growth. So this is probably, if I'm wrong, you tell me, because I'm just trying to draw and make sense out of this. So that becomes important. So we speak up language. But then I pause. I said, this is all good and I like it. And I subscribe to the possibility, to the thesis of epistemic mobility, because homogeneous ontology undermines us. It freezes us out from possibility for creative knowledge. So we are looking for a creative adaptation for future knowing that it's inclusive, it's plurality, but also for our own good. You know, with mobile, then we have space to learn more, to know more, to understand more. It's beautiful, it's wonderful. It's wonderful. We're not like, it becomes, we can't be like just characters in Plato's allegory of the cave, celebrating ignorance as knowledge. So it's just the pedagogic here, the epistemic brings a pedagogic way in which we can see, wow, there's so much more to learn. And then, but we recognize too, my own anxiety. I have an anxiety. I mean, I studied in Zimbabwe for my bachelor degree. I studied in South Africa. And then Deutschland for my first PhD. I went to Cambridge. I'm a former Jesuit, one of the big Jesuit priests. I love the Jesuit order. So I studied Latin and Greek. I know this, I speak like 11, 12 languages. And I say, I've read since the Gallic War in Latin. And I say, okay, but I'm speaking in languages and language. I feel my passion is not in Igbo, it's in English and stuff like that. So she threw away the baby and bathwater. And you're right. You did not say we should throw away, because there are schools of decolonization that should actually go for the other way around. And I was so excited that you said, no. We do not say we throw away. We say like competitive collaboration. That's what I'm thinking, that what I don't suggest, a middle way, competitive collaboration. Because then Abiola really says this in praise of alienation. What do? I studied those languages. I think in those languages. Question is not abandoning them, but to see how do I make it to work within the context of my own experience? I bring you in now, but the contextualization becomes necessary to speak to the experiences of the people, to speak and respond. Then it becomes possible. Then epistemic mobility. Then it's possible to have a practical solution. Now I move from my first studies in history to politics now. So mobility, change, transformation, subversion of what was orthodox, because we've tried it before. So if we're trying it before, why do we keep doing it? So the question, what is the question? No, is it wrong question and wrong solution, or right solution and wrong question? We keep doing the same thing. Why don't we move away? So why it hasn't worked? Why don't we try and we can find it only in plurality? Where's the fact? In the plurality, that kind of plurality. He doesn't say that I am trying to enthrone one method over the other. You were clear about that when you mentioned about the equality versus apprentice systems. And I want to add, but it's not so just the binarism, it's not the creation of binarism, no, it's not new binarism. Context is contemporaneous. So another word, we want to say contemporaneous here. So it's contemporaneous, contemporaneous. Contemporaneity is not binary, it's not either or. It is inclusive in the sense that it's dialogic, so that every encounter of knowledge systems is a space for progress, whatever I want to call it, understanding, judgment, and perhaps we might arrive at subjective conversion. So the question is, this fetishism orthodoxy entraps us in a world of ignorance, parading itself, or dogma, celebrating itself as public truth. So we parade dogmas, dogmas that became legitimated upon cultural dogmas, the dogmas that constitute scientific knowledge, legitimated from point of view of, so I speak Dutch. I have to, they hired me here new, but for me to be tenured, I need to speak Dutch. I'm going to learn Dutch, a beautiful language. I need to learn that. So I asked my colleague, Tarana and Shona, do you speak Shona? Do you speak Xhosa? So all the languages, I speak German, doesn't count, but I need to learn Dutch, which is, I need to learn it because this is the standard for you to be a tenured professor, or you need to learn Dutch. So if I don't learn it, in a year's time, I'll be fired in Netherlands. Probably. So the whole point is that the question is there a way of rethinking all these modalities? There's so much more to offer, because it's only in those spaces of diversity, differences, tensions, and stuff like that that new knowledge system evolves. And this is why decolonization becomes a necessary tool. And it's better to know that decolonization is not a displacement narrative. It's not displacement. I didn't hear it because I was ready to hear in that sense. It's not a displacement narrative. It is not displacement ontology. Displacement ontology in which another dogma is placed above others as superior. So push away stuff like that kind of subversion. It doesn't, because that would lead, of course, to epistemic colonization, which is not what we want. The post-structuralism and stuff like that. Sorry, I think I have so much to say. Let me shut up now. Wow. Okay, sorry, I made so much notes, but I'll stop here. Ultimately, thank you for this. So we need to think about these things in this sense. That's a reconstitution, rethinking on all those things. It's a space for growth, for human growth in that sense. And it is beautiful. So it is wonderful. It's not, language as a source of oppression is not new. It's even in European history. I don't know if there's any German here, Leiden and Schunugon, but I'm going to make a joke. In the 14th century, German was the most, they say, the least of civilized languages. So the joke was, well, I speak English to my business partner because English is the language of commerce and business. I speak Spanish to my soldier because Espanol is the language of command. I speak Italian to my God because Italian is the language of religion. I speak French to my mistress because French is the language of diplomacy. They say diplomacy and mistress. Then I speak German to my dogs because German is list of civilized languages, but it was political. The same way it's happening. I say it's political. So if you, in my language, they say, if you want to kill a dog, give it a bad name. So it's also what I call simplification, my own theory, simplification of masking. So when you say German is civilized languages, those who spoke German do not have that kind of subjective authority or power. They lose legitimation as German speakers. So German scholars were not writing in German anymore. They were writing in French or Latin. And so that's why Hedda came and said, enlightenment, get away. It's not rationality, but language. So if you speak language, so I say, well, shame on you, German academics writing in foreign languages. We should come by because the source of humanity is not rationality, as opposed to this, the neo-Kantian, all those enlightenment, but language, if you have language. So come back. German humanists then appropriated, so wow, go back to German, let's write in German and abandon French and stuff like that. This is why it's so important. And so then I go, as kids, people learn all this, so they know all the states and capital in the United States, they know everything, but say, who found out River Niger? Mungo Park. And then they bring Lake Victoria, Now, but there's Zambia. The Zambian side say, no, it's not Lake Victoria, it's Mosi Otunya. Mosi Otunya in Nyanja means the smoke that thunders. But there's Lake Victoria, this and this. But you see how it percolates over time. It shapes culture. shapes religion, shapes consciousness, shapes political. But then, and this is a crucial qualification, people believe in it. So you begin to accept it as public truth. You act upon it. And this is why it becomes very traumatic in the trading sense. They do it without knowing that people believe in it, associate with it. And they say, you see that in religion, white God, black God, whatever, like everything, then white becomes superior. In imagination, this is why we need to decolonize language. It's so important. Black magic, Schwarzenegger, black travel, black this, becomes powerful. We need to subjective enunciation. Yes, another good word. So avoid all those kind of transcend and make meaning. Sorry, I need to stop. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.